Hello and welcome to Colonial Outcast, the anti-imperialist podcast that will get me, perhaps you, questioned by federal agents when I or you go back through U.S. customs into the continental United States on my way back from the UK. And if whatever happens to you, repeat after me. I know you are targeting human rights activists, and I'm not saying anything without the presence of a lawyer. And just keep repeating that second clause again and again and again. Try to get a direct flight to your final destination in the US because they will, out of pettiness, make you miss it. So, I got that to look forward to coming back into it. And as a former field interrogator, let me assure you that the more you say, the more inevitable it is that you will F up and screw yourself over. Don't do your jobs for them. Don't talk to cops. Anyways, I'm your host, Greg Stoker, and I am joined for our semi-regular geopolitical roundup episode with contributor Alina Xenofontos. I'm currently traveling right now, so I'm sorry for one fewer episode a week. Mark is supposed to have published an extensive interview with a former Sandinista or something, but he keeps procrastinating, so make sure to swarm his Instagram comments and demand its release. We are still doing an exclusive Patreon content throughout the week, and you can follow us there for free and get access to all regular episodes without a paywall, just in case we get deplatformed on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Oh, yeah. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star review. We need to break 1,000 so we can get pushed into a new algorithm. Anyways, thank you so much. Alina, how are you doing?
Oh yeah, it's been good. Very good,
Like,
so to
good
speak.
in a sarcastic way?
Yeah, in a sarcastic way. It's in a very sarcastic way. It's been chaotic, to say the least.
Yeah, well, nothing's new. I think we've entered a new phase of U.S. politics, though. That's for sure. Or maybe it's the same. I don't know.
I mean, we have seen progress. I think in terms of, as I've said before, I think following everything that happened in Syria, we are currently seeing the U.S. make some movements towards fulfilling their particular ambitions within the region. It is, I think, overly ambitious. I don't think anything is, concrete, set in stone at this point. But in comparison to where we were, for example, this time last year, it's definitely more in their favor than it was this time last year,
More in the
both for
favor of
Israel
what
and
more in the favor of what we like to call the Western imperialists.
yeah, yeah, I would say right now they have made some strategic gains. But again, we'll obviously get into it. To what extent that will materialize, it's a different story. But yeah, it's a touch and go situation at the moment.
Yeah, and uh just kind of like give an overview of what this episode will look like for the audience. We're going to start by focusing in on Gaza, all the developments, all the insanity that's currently happening, and then spread out towards the region of West Asia, specifically Syria. There's been some developments
Mhm.
there with the current leader, and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states with regards to AI, Trump's visit to Riyadh, and, the eternal war against China. So that's kind of what we're
Mhm.
looking at, 3 segments, but we're going to first start with Gaza. Before I get into that, uh, you would say that they don't want a Syrian civil war, a new Syrian civil war.
Uh, mm,
I don't think
Again,
so.
it you know, I, I believe that what they want is to try to secure Syria through using some sort of civil conflict so as to kind of establish what I've said before, these sort of administrative divisions, and maybe placing some sort of military presence, but like more so in the form of like peace buffers, like sort of peaceful forces, UN forces, that sort of kind of setup so that they can maintain and control it. Because at the end of the day, they do want to strategically control Syria as much as possible, so as to pacify the resistance within the rest of the region, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in Palestine. So that's my opinion of what they don't want a full scale war, but at the same time, that I do think that the kind of tensions that we're seeing in Syria right now, they're going to capitalize on it. Again, it's about finding that right balance of what it is that they're looking for, and that is the opportune moment to kind of, I guess, yeah, divide Syria into these semi-autonomous regions, and then use the kind of conflict to play some sort of NATO presence, so to speak. I mean, whatever, Western troops in the form of peacekeeping forces, so as to like control, weapons, going through Syria, possibly into the hands of resistance fighters and sort of securing it in that form. But a full scale civil war, no, that wouldn't be to their interest. So it's a fine line.
Right, and we've seen Israeli generals quoted in like Haaretz and Mariv and Ynet say, what they want is a Balkanization thing with kind of the Druze along the Golan Heights protecting their interests. So, and that of course goes back to their doctrine of the periphery, which we'll get into yet again. We like to talk about Israeli military doctrines because they never change. They've been sitting in the desk in the cabinet for like 50 years and they just don't change. But anyways, we're going to get to Syria. We have some pretty interesting footage from Robert Ford, the former ambassador to Syria, giving a lecture at the Council on Foreign Relations, and he basically discloses his involvement in a Western-led initiative to rehabilitate Jolani into al-Shara from an al-Qaeda leader into a liberal political figure. But before we do that, we have to do an all eyes on Gaza segment because it is absolutely astoundingly insane and absurd and horrific. So let's get into it. So first of all, today, we're going to start by focusing on that, which is the most visible epicenter of violent imperial policy on the planet, and then, again, expand into the Gulf states. Trump's recent trip to Riyadh and the U.S. effort to build the Gulf into an AI bastion against China, get Saudi and Syria to normalize with Israel in order to expand and complete the Abraham Accords, which it looks like will happen. I think Alina might disagree with me on that, but we'll debate that later on. And the Iranian nuclear deal developments, we'll touch on that at the end. But before we get started, again, I want to state categorically that if you bought the manufactured and controlled leaks/drama about Trump and Netanyahu actually having some sort of substantive falling out over the Houthi ceasefire and Iran talks, please stop doing that. Okay, it's almost an identical piece of theater to the controlled Biden leaks last year when G-Side Joe purportedly called Netanyahu a bad fucking guy. Ooh. So the ethnic cleansing and privatization of Gaza is something that President Trump wants, his son-in-law Jared Kushner wants, his cabinet full of real estate moguls want, comprador Saudi and Gulf leaders demonstrably want. And while Netanyahu and far-right ministers like Smotrich may be upset about the U.S. Houthi ceasefire and the fifth round of Iran nuclear talks, which are proposed to be happening soon, those were always stretch goals. Okay. The Likud party, whose dogma produced From the River to the Sea, wants exactly that. That's the primary Zionist mission. And securing the Israel proper in service of the messianic vision of a greater Israel is goal number one. They're focused on that. These other things are stretch goals, right? We keep looking for a modicum of realpolitik concerned about the political and economic longevity of the state of Israel, but this is overwhelmingly ideological. So let's observe smarmy, grinning Hitler as I read the translation. This is him talking to his own people, which is interesting because Netanyahu does two types of press conferences, one for the Americans and one for the Israeli people. And he's way more honest about what his actual intentions are when he's talking to the Israeli people, not to Western citizens or our Congress. So I'm going to turn the volume way down so you don't have to hear his voice as much. And I am just going to read the translated captions. Here we go. All right, we are conducting an immense, intense, and tremendous battle. There is progress. We're going to take control of everything of the Gaza Strip, and that's what we're going to do. And one more thing, I simply salute the reservists. I salute our soldiers. They're doing such a great job there, including this morning. I can't go into all details, but we are not giving up. To do this, we must do it in a way that they won't stop us. And what he means by they won't stop us is anyone, not Hamas, not the international community. He says we are going to take control of the entirety of the Gaza Strip. And he has vowed that he's made a vow. And and maybe you want to talk about this. After he said that, there was an open letter as three key allies attacked his, quote, egregious escalation of the military campaign and blockade of humanitarian aid. So Britain, France, and Canada attacked Israel's expansion of its war as disproportionate, described the conditions in Gaza in an open letter again as intolerable, and threatened a, quote, concrete response if Israel's campaign continues. I guess by concrete response, they mean more weapons to Israel. Didn't Britain just authorize, like, after this open letter with Canada and France, more arms to Israel? Am I mistaken there?
On the same day, it was actually sent into Israel on the morning of the same day they made that statement. And this is obviously in conjunction to the inundated now sort of information that we have with regards to how the UK specifically is using its bases in Cyprus to constantly aid the surveillance and military operations, essentially, to participate in the genocide against the Palestinian people. So, I mean, sitting now and making these sort of, political declarations that we're going to crack down on Israel and we're going to crack down, but kind of assert some sort of political, send a political message by threatening the use of sanctions, etc., on particular figures as well. Like it's very controlled, right? It's just more a theatrical display, if anything, to appease the public more so than it is actually rooted in any sort of attempt to oppose Israel. I mean, the first step would be, of course, stop the arms shipments to Israel, stop allowing your bases in Cyprus to be used in order to engage in Holocaust. None of that is actually going to happen. And then, we could discuss this like in a second, but I don't know if you saw just like a couple of hours ago, I think David Lemmy, he just basically came out and said that they're going to be sanctioning some of the leaders of the settlement movement in West Bank. So like, what's her name? Daniela Weiss. We all know that particular character in the West Bank settlements. And
Frau ethnic cleansing. She has the headscarf that she always wears,
yeah,
and she looks like
yeah.
kind of like a carrion bird, like a vulture. Not trying to do ad hominems, but if you're a genocide S or genocide air, you get ad hominems on this podcast. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. She also kind of looks to me, I know this must like a bizarre, but she has the same, little smirk on her face that Netanyahu always has that
Yeah.
I find very aggravating. She has the exact same smirk. So they said they'll be sanctioning these individuals. And then they also said, we're no longer going to continue engaging in new free trade agreements with Israel, but we're still going to continue the existing ones. So again, it just goes to show that this is a lot of just it's just a lot of posturing on behalf of the United Kingdom, France, and Canada to claim that in some way, shape, or form they're condemning Israel's behavior, that they are for the Palestinian movement. Again, it's more so a political theatrical display to appease the public, but without any sort of de facto alterations in the way that they're contributing to sustaining this imperialist project, which they are very much a part of, and as guilty of, as well as Netanyahu.
Right. And like, I guess one of the themes of this episode is political theater, both with the Trump and Netanyahu falling out, and then this absurd statement. I'm just going to read like 5 sentences. Just pay attention to the language from this open letter, this statement from the three governments. Quote, the Israeli government's denial of essential humanitarian assistance to the civilian population is unacceptable and risks, present tense, risks breaching international humanitarian law, implying, subtext there is they haven't breached yet, but they're almost about to. We condemn the
Mhm.
abhorrent language used recently, you mean you mean since October 7th, by members of the Israeli government, threatening that in their despair at the destruction of Gaza, civilians will start to relocate. Permanent forced displacement is a breach of international humanitarian law. Continuing, Israel suffered a heinous attack on October 7th. We have always supported Israel's right to defend Israelis against terrorism, but this escalation is wholly disproportionate. Again, implying that what's happened before, the dropping of more than almost three nuclear bombs worth of net
Mhm.
explosive weight hasn't been disproportionate yet. So it's more liberal Western democracy freaking mumbo jumbo crap, essentially.
Yeah, and it's just more so as well about the fact they really want to try to portray that they want to return back to the status quo, because at least
Right.
it was a form of violence, because it was always I mean, the status quo was violent towards the Palestinian people, but a sort of violence that was acceptable because it was done in very gradual doses, and it wasn't obviously this grandiose it wasn't so evidently imperialistic from the perspective of the world, from for the from the perspective of the masses worldwide anyway. So they really want to get back to that kind of status quo. Like, we do want a two-state. They don't really care about two-state solution. They just want the Palestinians to be kept quiet, the occupation to continue, and just to go back to that kind of rhetoric that continues indefinitely, maintaining the situation as it is. That's another thing that they're trying to essentially achieve, and also regurgitating the same point, reminding people of October 7th and the crimes against Israel. Like, that statement there as well as a kind of reminder about the sort of propaganda, the Israeli propaganda about October 7th as well.
Yeah, and it's endemic that it is very demonstrative that they will continue to give political cover for Israel. Like 99% of this is performative, but I do believe it's helpful in normalizing, or at least I've been told. I had a conversation with a friend about this last night, who I kind of disagree with, but I want to represent her perspective on this. It's performative, but she believes it's helpful in normalizing the narrative that Israel is the baddie and we're the baddies. But again, this is all political face saving. That's almost insultingly superficial. From Bush to Obama to Biden to Trump, there's always been mainstream reporting on, quote, strained relations between the US and Israel, but the aid and support always flows. It continues to flow. And that's what we're seeing. I concur. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and also as well, like, I mean, the military industrial complex, like the defense companies, are so deeply entrenched in Israel. I mean, the Palestinians were the guinea pigs for Israel's kind of war machine, but also for the military industrial complex to be able to, combat test their new weapons upon the Palestinian people, as well as surveillance in the tech companies. So they have so much money. There's so much connection between like like the ruling classes in the U.S. and the occupation of Palestine. So of course, the U.S. and its administrations are always going to protect Israel because there's so much investment in that occupation. It was a money making machine for them as well, which is something that doesn't always often get as discussed as much as it ought to.
Right. And, the bombs will continue to get sent. They'll continue to fall. But why this political theater? And, Dropsite News put out an article a couple hours ago before recording, this being what, 5 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. And I definitely agree with it. To quote it, Netanyahu has admitted that the decision to allow minimal humanitarian aid into Gaza is a calculated move to deflect international criticism over Israel's starvation of the Palestinians of Gaza and to allow for the conquering and seizing of the Gaza Strip. Quoting Netanyahu, our best friends in the world, senators I know as strong supporters of Israel, those being U.S. senators, have warned that they cannot support us if images of mass starvation emerge. He said, to continue the war of annihilation, he asserted, quote, we need to do it in a way that they won't stop us, unquote, from the article. So basically letting in 5 aid trucks, 2 of which are filled solely with funeral shrouds. I don't know if you guys saw the story. 2 of the 5 aid trucks that were let in for the entire enclave, aka concentration camp, of less than 2 million people, more than 1.5 million people. We don't know numbers. Is literally hundreds, thousands, and thousands of funeral shrouds. That was the aid that they got. So I suppose this is some sort of delusional expression of we're kind of letting aid in, so now U.S. senators don't have to call us out. So I just wanted to point out also that as of today, UN's humanitarian chief Tom Fletcher said on a few hours ago as well, that 14,000 babies in Gaza could die in the next 48 hours if aid doesn't reach them. Speaking to BBC Radio's 4 Today program, Fletcher denounced the limited amount of aid entering the Strip, saying that only 5 trucks, which we've already stated, were allowed into the enclave on Monday, which he described only as a drop in the ocean. Obviously, that's an insane amount. Although aid and trucks and lorries are technically in Gaza, the UN chief says supplies which contain baby food and nutrition are not reaching civilians because, again, they're sending funeral shrouds. Also, Smotrich, the finance minister, far-right finance minister in Israel, says Gaza is to be, quote, totally destroyed, population concentrated in a small area. He's an ultranationalist, they want to make the population totally despairing and so that they leave the Strip. And he also predicts that the West Bank will be annexed before the end of the government's term. So, I guess one of the most cyberpunk dystopian aspects of this is that there's a pilot program and we talked about this last night before the episode, to have U.S. military contractors, all veterans,
Mhm.
be in charge of the distribution of aid by, quote, the organization called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. GHF. It's led by an ex-Marine sniper whose name is Jake Wood. It's set to launch by the end of the month as the Israeli occupation begins its, quote, Gideon's Chariots operation, a full-scale offensive aimed at the complete annihilation of Palestinians in Gaza. So we know that the GHF recruits U.S. military veterans and limits aid operations to southern and central Gaza, a model that the UN warns would violate every core humanitarian principle and effectively facilitates Israel's forced displacement of Palestinians from the north. And this has become known as a starvation plus policy, where Israel strategically weaponizes the use of starvation, not just as a side effect of war, but as a deliberate, enhanced tool of warfare and diplomatic pressure. So in the end, this Gaza aid stream, and I want your thoughts on this, simply offers Israel symbolic cover to finish or attempt to finish the genocide. And now the Israeli government today has stated that it will withdraw its delegation from Doha in Qatar because no progress has been made on the ceasefire negotiations. So my question is, broadly, are they going to get away with this? Like we can talk about Libya,
I mean,
about the breaking news story about how, Trump wants to move half the people of Gaza to Libya, a civil war torn country that cannot support 1 million refugees.
no, that's not going to
So
happen.
yeah, so
No.
what do
Okay.
you think about this whole thing?
Okay. I think. Okay. So this is the thing. Whether they're going to get away with it, it's an interesting question because they're going to try. There's no way that they're going to manage to expel the Palestinians out of Gaza. That's going to be something that's going to be very difficult to accomplish. They're not going to be able to send them to Libya, like you said. It's a war-torn country that's facing civil war in itself. It's very unstable. And even if the Libyan sort of leadership says, okay, that's not. I mean, how do you actually go about that? You would need to strategically base yourself in Gaza and start mobilizing people outward. This would cause international outrage to a point that even the Western sort of political class within the EU, etc., would not even be able to justify, nor even the Gulf states, not even the states of Western Asia. Yeah,
Oh,
go ahead.
oh, no, I just want to ask a question just for the audience.
Hmm.
So like when you say like if that happened, like Western politicians and policymakers, both in Europe,
Hmm.
North America, and the Gulf states wouldn't be able to get away with it, or they
Hmm.
wouldn't support it. Well, I think I anticipate some people in the comment section being like, well, they've completely funded a full blown live stream genocide, the first in history. So why would this be any different? Why politically would they not be able to make it happen?
Because I mean, it's even what the British just said. I mean, look at what the British are saying now. We support a two-state solution. We're going to be sanctioning the West Bank. The idea is to continue this the notion that we do want the establishment of Palestinian statehood. You're seeing more countries within the West, such as Spain, who is now recognizing Palestine as a state. So I mean, it's going to. This isn't just like, okay, they're committing acts of violence and genocide, which is now becoming all the more ubiquitously accepted, even by the political class, particularly the EU. I mean, we saw the former Joseph Borrell, who would also basically now called it a genocide. The former sort of, I guess, foreign affairs officer of the European Union. He had also said something along the same lines. So the initial rhetoric which they were using, which was like, okay, well, Israel has a right to defend itself, which was, legalistically speaking, an inaccurate statement to make, and that has been reaffirmed repeatedly, even by the ICJ. They were able to sort of use the so-called October 7th, the horrors that Israel it had endured at the hands of Hamas as a pretext to justify to a certain extent the violence. But
Mhm.
because Israel's violence has gone above and beyond, and now they're openly stating that we do want to permanently displace the Palestinians, we do want to take over the Gaza Strip, we're going to completely get rid of I mean, these are open declarations. They've been making them gradually over the last year, but now we're seeing it happen. Like it's completely amplified. They've completely dropped the veneer of, okay, we're only doing it for their own good. Because initially I remember that was the statements that they were making a year ago. They were stating that, the Palestinians need to be, I don't know, temporarily sort of removed from the Gaza Strip for their own safety, etc. But now it's just gone on to, no, we are taking the Gaza Strip. It's
Mhm.
ours. It belongs to us, and there isn't anybody who's going to stop us from doing so. So because the rhetoric has gotten so extreme, a lot of the political establishment within the West will no longer be able to continue to justify, and it will cause an uproar, humbly, but not just in the West, but even within the Arab states because of the populations as well. I mean, forget what the Gulf monarchies are. They obviously they're the ruling class of these particular regions, and they have ties, to the corporations involved, within the West, that will, and how it will interest them. However, the people, whether it's in Egypt, whether it's in, just Jordan, even, who, half the population identifies to a certain degree as Palestinian, they will not tolerate something like that. And again, it won't even be feasible to even take the, I mean, and this is just what's going to be politically acceptable. Then we're getting into the actual logistics of it. For you to, for Israel to be able to do something like this means that Israel will have to essentially get into Gaza, destroy the resistance, and militarily place itself to in a way that they will be able to start pushing people out where,
It,
into
it,
Egypt and then into Libya. I mean, the whole thing, it's going to start creating a lot of tensions within, the border with Egypt. You're going to start seeing, the Egyptians becoming, like, I think, the local populations, the tribes, becoming antagonized by this. Sorry, you say your thing, and I can continue what you're saying. What
Oh
I was
yeah,
saying.
yeah. No, no. I mean, like, just to kind of drill down on the delusional absurdity of this, like, literally, they would have to pack Palestinians into
Yeah,
trucks, drive them across borders, and dump them in countries that don't want them, that might fight
exactly.
them, might resist. And of course, the U.S. could do all the sanctions they want and use all the political leverage they want, but still, it's just not a workable framework.
It's not just that it's not a workable framework, it's going to actually unsettle the comprador states within the region. So what do I mean? You don't want,
Arab
I mean,
Spring 2.0.
exactly, because the way that the United States is able to even assert control within the region is by, by aligning itself with, I guess, the political ruling classes in each particular country. Egypt, for example, the monarchy in Jordan, for example, right? You have to align with these sort of ruling institutions. Once you kind of, I mean, we've seen this happen repeatedly in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Once you've basically unleashed Palestinians into different territories, the Palestinians will not stop resisting. They will not stop wanting to fight to go back to their homes. I mean, even if they were able to say succeed in removing some of the Palestinian population, this is going to start local uprisings. The Palestinians might even join forces with local uprisings. And what will this do? It risks essentially revolutions, the Arab Spring from taking place in other countries within the region. Oh, and when you have that situation, I mean, the ruling classes in those particular countries are very well aware that their positions are going to be threatened, and that's something that they're not about to tolerate. So, and then when you don't, and also, as the United States does not want to lose the particular people that are in power, because right now, like I said, they ally with the US. So now, if they try to do something like that, it will completely unsettle the Middle East to a point that is actually going to backfire, for the United States going forward, because you're risking interregional conflict. Because what that's essentially going to do is, like I said, Palestinians will reorganize, probably trying to start some sort of cross-border attacks with Israel, which will cause Israel to retaliate, etc. Or, like I said, some sort of Arab Spring within different places. And some of them, especially, for example, in Jordan, like, let's just bring Jordan into the equation for a second. They're the monarchy is just holding on by a thread. At this point, they're holding on by a thread. And this is why, like, Sisi had even come out and said, the president of Egypt has said, if there is any sort of displacement of Palestinians into Egypt, even, or even if Egypt is used at this point, it is almost like a declaration of war. It directly risks his position in power and the
Yeah,
stability of Egypt as a whole.
yeah, because, like, where would they go? The Sinai Peninsula? The Bedouin tribes are not going to tolerate that. They're already fighting a low grade
Hmm.
counterinsurgency against them that's
Hmm.
stable right now, but that could blow up at any second too.
Exactly. And then it goes down to, like, in the logistics of Gaza itself. I mean, you've got, I think I was looking at reports. I mean, we don't have the accurate numbers. I keep saying this because obviously the Israeli state does not want to put forward the accurate, like, the
Hmm.
actual numbers. But we're talking that the reservists willing to go back are at 50 to 60%, as opposed to 120% that it was following October 7th. Okay.
Hmm.
Which is like about 100,000 less than what it was. We don't actually know the amount of soldiers, reservists that have been wounded and cannot go back. The numbers that were at 9,000, like, about a year ago at this point. I'm sure those numbers have significantly increased then. Many of them are, they've actually written open declarations and letters against the Israeli state, saying they do not want to go back and fight. So there is a reluctancy to go back into Gaza, into the Gaza Strip. And like I've said before, when we're no longer looking at just defeating Hamas anymore, they're talking about permanent occupation, which means that they need men on the ground. And this is really, really important, because right now Israel has it's basically stretched out. So not only do they have to still maintain a military presence up in the north in order to monitor Hezbollah, because Hezbollah has gone eerily quiet at this particular point, but you still need to monitor Hezbollah in the north. So you've got them, there's a military presence in the north to monitor Hezbollah, but now you've got Israel, who's also occupying large sections of Syria. We don't actually know, again, the numbers of how many IOF soldiers are in Syria as well, but that also means that they've got manpower that is requisite to maintain control over Syria. You also obviously have what's going on in the West Bank that they need to keep control of. And now you would have to need not just forces anymore to go in and out of Gaza, but actually forces for a permanent occupation. And most reservists have said, including the conscription soldiers, that they do not want to go into Gaza and stay in Gaza, because Gaza is a hostile territory. Because at the end of the day, look at what they've done to the people. You have an entire strip with hundreds of thousands of people all enraged and who loathe the Zionist state, who have lost family members, friends, who have witnessed or are undergoing an actual genocide. These individuals are not about to bow down and allow the Israeli forces to casually stroll around Gaza. These are boys that are angry. These are boys that are, at this point, they're fearless. I mean, they have absolutely nothing to lose. Who
Yeah.
are armed, and they will attack Israeli civilians. And many of the conscription, like the 18-year-olds that they're planning to send into Gaza, because according to the Times of Israel, I'll just say this very quickly, the reservists that they're planning to take on is not to actually send them into Gaza, is to replace the conscription soldiers who are currently placed in the north to monitor Hezbollah and the West Bank. They're going to take those boys, throw them into Gaza with no experience, like a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds, into hostile territory to establish the permanent occupation of Gaza against resistance fighters and an enraged Palestinian population. That's
Right.
insane.
So, I mean, one of the reasons, Israel's created a whole new acronym, as I always say: wounded child, no surviving family. But
Mm-hmm,
when you talk about permanent occupation here, we talked about the cleansing and the
mm-hmm,
privatization of the Gaza Strip, and this is why I want to bring back the issue of contractors. Like, part of the
yeah,
military-industrial complex is the defense contractor industry. So, when we look at this new PMC, sorry, that's private military contractor
mm-hmm,
uh, organization that's cropped up over the past year and a half, called, again, GHF, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. These are all generally combat veterans who are going to go in there and do humanitarian aid work. Now, I see this as a pilot program to see if it's even workable, because there are a lot
mm-hmm,
of interests aligned in having defense contractors, U.S. defense contractors, permanently in Gaza. It reminds me of the security forces on Afghan and Iraqi bases. A lot of the security forces were not soldiers and they were not Marines. They were private security contractors, because they're so good at washing money out of the public sector into the private sector. Because, of
mm-hmm.
course, taxpayer money will pay for these guys to privatize security and the distribution of aid throughout the Gaza Strip. And Israel gets the added benefit of not having to use its own soldiers.
I was about to
So,
say, so yeah, so the private security contractors. I mean, always it's always good to remind ourselves that a lot of these private security contractors that were also placed in Iraq, the magic of private security is that they were the ones that actually committed some of the worst war crimes in Iraq. But because they're not directly linked to the U.S. military, they kind of function a little bit outside the law, because they're not part of the actual official U.S. military, but they kind of act in sort of collaboration with the U.S. military, as in reaching like the kind of objectives that they do in a particular region. So it's a form of I have said it is sort of like U.S. boots on the ground to a certain extent, but not directly. It's a form of indirect U.S. military boots on the ground.
right.
If you want to say something, and I was gonna,
Yeah,
go
no,
ahead.
I mean, this is kind of a standard practice for great powers to do
Yeah,
when they want to get involved in a region, but have some
it's
a
indirect.
degree of political separation, and also, yeah. So again, U.S. has a ton of contractors in Africa, companies like Red Legion, Triple Canopy. Russia has the
Hmm.
Wagner Group all across the Sahel. Uh, Basically doing similar things that what U.S. contractors are doing. This is a pretty standard practice. And then Israeli contractors can be found in South America, in South Asia, all over the place too. So this is nothing new, but
Yeah.
this is specifically what it's meant for within the context of Gaza.
Yeah, but that's what I'm trying to say. It's nothing new. We've seen this happen before. But why it matters in this case of Gaza is that it is what I'm trying to sort of bring attention to. It is more U.S. involvement, whether
Mhm.
indirectly, because these private corporations, these private sort of like defense companies, they do work contractually with the U.S. government. They're very so there is going to be an understanding as to what's going to be what their purpose is there. And the fact that they're going to be the supposed forces protecting the humanitarian aid, which is now going to as well be run by private sort of companies in Gaza. And according to the, is it the GHE, what's it called, the new program that they're basically putting forward in Gaza, the humanitarian aid program,
Mhm.
it's going to be placing like certain key strategic locations. So what does that mean? When you've got private contractors, and we've already seen that anyway in Gaza Strip, there are already some private contractors, only like a small number, and they were also there at the beginning of the ceasefire as well to make sure that the hostages were going to be exchanged and all that. But like when you're going to amplify and put even more of these, I guess, forces in Gaza in these particular strategic locations, what I feel it's going to end up doing is it's going to help make up it's going to work alongside the IOF in trying to target Palestinian resistance. They're going to be placed again, like I said, in strategic locations,
Yeah.
probably carrying out operations, maybe even some form of surveillance in order to help Israel better be able to manage Gaza, fundamentally because it lacks the manpower and the military capacity to do that. So these defense companies are actually coming in the form of, we are helping to get aid to the Palestinian people, which, as we've always heard, like the rhetoric as well from the White House is constantly like, oh, well, the reason is, well, I mean, this is another angle to, the narrative that they're trying to sell, that, oh, well, the Palestinians as well are not, even when we send humanitarian aid into Gaza, it's Hamas that doesn't let the people have access to the aid, which has been another theme that they've brought up. So, we need those private defense contractors there in order to make sure that the Palestinian people get the food. But this also brings, I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing sort of direct action between the Palestinian resistance and these contractors.
So yeah, I do want to make this point to kind of explain how this works. So basically, back in January, Axios News kind of broke the story that U.S. security contractors were heading to Gaza to oversee the Netzarim corridor, which, if you're not familiar with Gaza, it's a wadi, or essentially a road uh, along a wadi that bifurcates north and southern Gaza. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
strategic location, a strategic corridor that the U.S. aid port was supposed to terminate in, but of course the U.S. mobile port was a complete catastrophe in an embarrassing way. Anyways, it separates the north and south. It's a natural checkpoint along the road, and it limits freedom of movement for any Palestinian going north to south. So when they sent these contractors in January, they were from UG Solutions and Safe Research Solutions. Bear in mind that the more ambiguous the name is, or the more innocuous and meaningless the name is with contractors, like generally the dirtier it is, based off my exposure to that whole world. But but as you were saying, Alina, this was also a pilot program. Can we put
Mm-hmm.
a group of 40 contractors, U.S. contractors, to guard a couple of security checkpoints and see whether or not they get blown up? Uh,
Yeah.
so Hamas didn't target them, obviously for reasons, for information operations reasons, political reasons, stuff like that. So because that hasn't happened yet, they're trying a new pilot program where they're taking a more active role. So part of their like passive role will be like distributing aid, but also getting like atmospheric intelligence, like, oh, who's the head
Mm-hmm.
honcho around this neighborhood?
I
Oh,
was just going to
who
say
are
that. Yeah.
these guys? Yeah. So they're kind of, and they're also going to be using Israeli surveillance tech as well. So it's also an intelligence collection operation
Exactly.
as well
That's what I
as
was wanting to say.
distributing aid. So just wanted to point that out for the audience. That's how this is going to work. And of course, there
Mhm.
aren't a lot of guys going. This is just another pilot program to see if they can do it throughout the entirety of the Gaza Strip.
I mean, we don't do. I haven't seen. Have you seen any sort of information with regards to like the numbers or of what they're sending in these time? I know the first time, obviously, because the thing is, the material conditions have somewhat changed now, and also the objectives have somewhat grown. And so I do think that they're test trialing how many they can send in. Like you said, it is going to be about information gathering in terms of what's actually happening on the ground. They're going to be using Israeli surveillance, but also kind of monitoring how the resistance is functioning. And because of the fact that they're actually going to, in my humble opinion, be more entrenched into Gaza and the way it's going to be done, I personally wouldn't. The logical thing to do, and I'm sure Hamas is very aware of this, or Al Qassam, etc., all the Palestinian resistance factions, they won't directly want to target these defense
Mhm.
sort of contractors. However, based on the fact that they're going to be sort of giving out the humanitarian aid and I guess the logistics of it, I wouldn't put it. I could see a possible confrontation happening at some point, and I think it's also worth reminding us, the whole temporary port that was established, and how that was used. Uh, if we remember, remember the temporary port that they established, the
Yeah,
humanitarian
I
corridor,
you brought that up. Hang on, let
and
me
then
get
and
my mic
then
real quick.
yeah, sure. But I'll just continue saying my point anyway. So yeah, when the humanitarian corridor was established, essentially, we saw how in the end the Israelis had used the port to get infiltrate into Gaza for their so-called rescue operation of what was it, 3 or 4 hostages, and then they killed hundreds of Palestinians, and they were able to do that because of the information they had gathered. And in the meantime, that humanitarian port didn't actually deliver anything in terms of humanitarian aid. So that was also another sort of practice operation, and we're kind of seeing that repeated now, but yet in a much more. I think it's going to be a further to entrench into the Gaza enclave, or the concentration camp. So I think. Yeah, I think it's going to be a bit of a step forward, and I do think that it is for the purpose of further trying to crack down on the resistance. I don't believe that it's going to really change anything, however, in
No,
terms of the resistance and how it's operating.
well, it's a very I talked to an ex-Marine who recently got out, uh, and lives in the area where one of these companies is based out of, and basically just a bunch of guys within the community who know each other are being approached right now. It's a very small group of people that are in this
Hmm.
kind of first wave of private military contractors. So they're just seeing if it can work or not. But
Yeah,
it's a disturbing precedent because that's what they want. They want that. They want a privatization of the Gaza Strip, and they want a
yeah.
stable Middle East that's completely comprador to their interests and that's manageable in a controlled chaos sort of way. And that's kind of why I wanted to get into Syria, unless there's any final things you want to say about the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, I did kind of want to bring up one very important thing before we move on. So, but it does connect with Syria. It is a testing ground right now as well, because they do want, I mean, it is absolutely important for them to try to placate the Palestinian resistance, because even the Gulf states have said they don't want Hamas in power, but also the Palestinian Authority even. And based on the leaks that we saw last week, there were leaks according to Axios, etc., that there are plans and there were discussions between the United States, and we've heard these discussions before. They're not relatively new, establishing a US-led administrative coalition rule over the Gaza Strip. But to be able to do that, you do need to crack down the resistance. So this is one of the aspects. This is another reason that they're test trialing this, and this is very important because I believe that the US is trying to sort of crack down on the resistance so that they can better be able to handle a sort of US-led coalition rule of Gaza, which I think will probably happen in conjunction with the Gulf states, because that will be more internationally acceptable as well for the populations of West Asia as well, because it's at least they've been run by the Gulf states and not by Israel, et cetera, et cetera. They tried to do something like this at the beginning stages of the, after 2000, in 2003, following the invasion of Iraq, but it wasn't very successful. But I think they're going to try to do something like this again, because this is what the leaked talks had said. For the
Right.
purpose of establishing Gaza, I do think the Gaza 2035 plan, and I do want to bring that up at least in passing, because it's going to connect to the conversations we're going to have afterwards as well, because the Gaza 2035 plan is inherently, essentially keep a portion of the Palestinian population there, turn it into an energy tech hub, but also like a real estate, hub for, all these private companies to come into Gaza. We're already seeing the privatization of Gaza, even through this aid and all these private security companies that are now inside Gaza. And we've even seen Trump, who essentially came out and said back in January, and all the videos that he was making, the AI videos about, how it's going to turn into like the Dubai, of the second Dubai essentially of the region. And they're going to be using the Palestinians, who will still be stateless, as a form of cheap labor. And then they're going to be connecting these sort of like it's going to be like this digital strip that they want to establish in order to combat China, etc. So we can get into in a second, because that's connected to, obviously, well, afterwards, connected to the AI deals, etc., that Saudi Arabia has agreed to with Trump. But I mean, if you're looking at the Gaza 2035 plan, it does look increasingly like this is really what they're trying to get. So, but to
Right.
do this, you do need to eliminate the Palestinian resistance as much as possible. Again,
And
I don't think it's possible, but that's what that's what they're testing for.
and you need to have formal normalization of diplomatic relations with all the Gulf states. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because if
Mm-hmm.
we look at the Gaza 2035 plan, there was an expose done of May 3rd last year, about in the Jerusalem Post, from crisis to prosperity, Netanyahu's vision for a Gaza 2035 revealed online. It's basically a plan and a document that establishes a free trade zone on the Gaza Strip, the Gaza Marine Basin, a new port in
Mm-hmm.
Al Arish, um,
Mm-hmm.
and an airport. So, and there are 3 steps to the success, and we're kind of seeing them try to echo a lot of this. So, first step,
Yeah, look at it.
titled humanitarian aid, is planned to last 12 months. Israel will create safe areas free of Hamas control, starting in the north and
Mm-hmm.
slowly spreading south. Presumably, now these safe zones will be secured and aid will be
Mm-hmm.
distributed through U.S. private military contractors. During this stage, a coalition of Arab countries, Saudi, UAE, Egypt, Bahrain, Jordan, and Morocco — Morocco is already normalized, by the way — will, during the first iteration of the Abraham Accords, will apportion and supervise humanitarian aid in the safe areas. Uh, Gaza Palestinians will run the safe zones under supervision of Arab states.
Exactly.
Stage 2 would occur in the next 10. So, stage 1, humanitarian aid, coalition of Gulf states, and Arab states that have normalized with Israel. Phase 2, next 5 to 10 years, is the plan is to move Israeli security responsibility to Israel, while the Arab coalition will create a multilateral body called the Gaza Rehabilitation Authority to oversee the reconstruction efforts and manage the Strip's finances. Stage 3 is termed self-governance, would see Israel retain the right to act against security threats, and power would be slowly transferred to either local Gaza government or a unified Palestinian government, the PA, which of course Israel would love, because the PA is an extension of the occupation.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it says, however, this is contingent on the successful de-radicalization and
Exactly.
demilitarization of the Gaza Strip, and subject to agreement by all parties, which will never, ever happen.
So as you can see there, we can see this is effectively stage one. They're preparing. We're seeing stage one unravel. This is exactly what it is. So when we're talking, when there were these leaks and Axios discussing about a US-led coalition again with the Arab states, we're seeing that happen right now. And what they're essentially saying is that the Palestinians will never get statehood. They would just have like be given like sort of like it actually said I guess the more aristocratic classes. He actually even said that in one of the articles that I was reading, but I can't remember where I saw it. But I will definitely find it and post it on my socials, because that was ridiculous. The more the I guess a wealthier class of Palestinians will kind of rule the Gaza Strip under the authority of the GCC, which is essentially obviously the Gulf states. They will never be giving sort of citizenship, maybe, or like maybe some sort of a temporary kind of like a like I guess I some kind of like a residency, no, yeah, some sort of citizenship anyway, to completely pacify the Palestinians and not and kind of squash any sort of desire for a Palestinian state. They will be restricted and confined within the Gaza Strip, not really having that kind of mobility. And then that will allow, and that this will actually be more acceptable, like I said, because it's an Arab control of Gaza, at least but it's only going to be short term. We've seen this before with Egypt and Jordan when they had control of the West Bank and Gaza, respectively. Before 1960, well, in Egypt's case, before 1967, and obviously afterwards in the 80s with the West Bank. But like, this is the thing. So it's absolutely it's we're seeing this kind of play out, and this is what they're trying to do: demilitarize. That's why they want to, and get into Gaza, use humanitarian aid as a means to create these kind of, I guess, create a West Bank in Gaza, so create these kind of humanitarian bubbles
which we
in
can
different
call
locations.
the ghettoization.
Yeah, this it is, but it is, and then they'll be kind of surveillancing that. You'll probably see, like, forces from from the Arab states and the U.S. with its, I guess, security, private security kind of uh, forces as well, trying to help Israel manage it, because Israel cannot do that on its own. And then the idea is then eventually creating a kind of situation where the Palestinians again are living like they are in the West Bank, kind of completely controlled, and then they're able to then say, "Oh, the Gulf states are going to save Gaza, rebuild it, et cetera, et cetera."
Yeah.
And then all these, we're going to see the complete privatization of Gaza. The Gaza 35 plan is exactly what we're seeing play out right now, like stage one.
Right. And we've kind of drawn a line from private military contractors to this Gaza plan. Now let's look at
Hmm.
let's look at the Abraham Accords, how they fit into this. So
Hmm.
looking back at this
Yeah.
article, the final step would be for the Palestinians to fully manage Gaza independently and join the Abraham Accords. Part of the rebuilding effort will include rebuilding from nothing and designing new cities from scratch, which will feature modern designs and planning. The plan presented several advantages for the countries involved. Major advantages for the Gulf states that take part would include defensive pacts with the U.S. and unfettered access to Gaza's Mediterranean ports through
Hmm.
railways and pipelines. The plan also says if such an intervention is successful in Gaza, it can be repeated in Yemen, Syria, and Lebanon.
Hmm.
So that's it right there. Like the Abraham Accords are thought to be a something to stabilize the entire region. Sure, but in a way that's solely advantageous to the U.S., Israel, and every other comprador monarchical dictator state in the region.
Hmm.
So, and just I kind of like to define terms, and I know that we continually get new subscribers all the time. So let's talk about the Abraham Accords real quick for the next 2 minutes, just so we're all on the same page. Now, this is Google's AI definition, which Elena will definitely have a problem with because I have a problem with it. Okay, so
You know me so well, Greg. Now,
yeah, to
yeah.
quote Google's AI definition, the Abraham Accords, signed in 2020, represent a series of agreements normalizing diplomatic relations between Israel and several so called moderate Arab states. I added the so called moderate to the literature. So the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. So those were the first few. Jordan was already normalized and has been for a while. The fourth Arab state, Sudan, also signed the declaration in 2020, but hasn't fully normalized relations due to internal turmoil. That's a really weird way for AI to put the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in Sudan, but whatever. The agreements aim to foster peace, understanding, and cooperation in the Middle East by promoting mutual understanding, respect for human dignity, and collaboration in various fields. Okay, nothing says respect for human dignity like occupation and genocide. So the core of these accords
Mm.
invites formally establishing diplomatic, commercial, and cultural ties between Israel and participating Arab nations. And the key principles of the accords are guided by mutual understanding, again, coexistence, respect for human dignity, and tolerance, as well as cooperation in areas like science, technology, and medicine. To translate what the Google AI, which is which is definitely infiltrated by X 8200 officers, is coexistence mean Israel dominates the region, Palestinians are erased, and cooperation in areas like science, technology, and medicine basically just means you buy Israeli spyware in order to suppress your own population so a second Arab Spring doesn't happen. And
Yeah.
and I guess the motivations are Israel sought to end its regional isolation and integrate more fully into the Middle East. The UAE and other Arab states aim to leverage economic and technological opportunities while also sharing a common concern about the perceived threat from Iran. Okay,
Okay.
yeah,
So there was something that I wanted to say. When, because we just read, for example, how the objective as well is to achieve the same sort of model of what they're trying to get in Gaza, in Lebanon, Syria, and
Yemen.
Yemen. This is really important because Gaza right now is a massive experiment that's taking place. It is an absolute massive. What's going to happen there is not going to stop. It's going to actually progress and into Lebanon and into Syria, and again, and Yemen. And this is why they're trying so hard right now to, and this is why Syria is very important. They need to get rid of the resistance, because if the Abrahamic Accord is to actually, the Abrahamic Accords are to go through to include these particular countries in order to achieve the type of economic trade routes like IMEC, to combat, I guess, China and the BRI, as well as it's all its other trade routes that are taking place. You need to actually be able to secure Syria, but also Lebanon. And if you cannot have, for example, resistance fighters in Iraq, you cannot have resistance fighters in Lebanon in the form of Hezbollah. And this is why they're trying to crack down so stringently, more than ever, on Hezbollah. And we're also seeing what we saw happen in Syria. And even though Trump has come out and said that, oh, we're going to leave Yemen alone, there's a bunch of reasons why he did that. That's not going to be a long-standing position. And we can see the Gulf monarchies are probably going to, and we've already seen them start to change the rhetoric again when it comes to Ansar Allah. I mean, I think was it Bahrain or the UAE? They had actually began, I think when the Iran-Saudi Arabia deals had come into place, they'd actually begun calling, starting to recognize Ansar Allah as the leaders of Yemen, but now it's gone back to the illegal sort of leadership. So that we're going back to like the sort of, Ansar as a terrorist sort of movement, and they do not even want to recognize it as the leadership now of the Yemeni people. So I do feel like we're going to start seeing them target and surround Ansar in different ways. It could be through the form of financial kind of coercion and the way that they control the central banks, for example, and then etc. We're going to see them maneuver like that. But this is why it's so, they need to defeat the resistance, and it's going to happen not just in Gaza. It will happen in the surrounding territories, because it's the only way to secure the Abrahamic Accords, which not only secures Israel, but Israel is purely like it's sort of like the extension of, I guess, imperialism, Western imperialism within the region. It would secure, the region within the digital AI hub that they're trying to create to, I guess, isolate and push back against China's AI development, because it all has to do with data control as well. Creating data embassies, controlling resources, controlling trade routes. And that's why that region is so important. Right. Like I said, the other way to do it, you've got to get rid of the resistance.
Yeah, I mean, it sits at the confluence of 3 different continents, and of course is minerally wealthy in a lot of things, mostly oil. But this is the problem at the heart of the Abraham Accords is the Palestinian problem needs to go away in one final solution. They either have to end the occupation or destroy every Palestinian without sparking a second Arab Spring. And corollary to that is Syria. We talked about having controlled chaos, perhaps a balkanization, a divvying up of resources. Of course, the Gulf states are involved. Israel is, the United States, Turkey, Turkey definitely. And if Syria goes up and ignites in a whole civil war, it's an uncontrollable situation. It could ignite the entire region. So let's just talk about al-Shara or Al-Golani, whatever you want to call him. I think he will try to normalize eventually, or potentially get assassinated. So, reporting
he's already, that's already a stated aim. I mean, him and even his foreign minister have gone into, like, he was at the New York in the United Nations of all places, saying that they want to normalize with Israel.
Yeah. And so what was interesting, though, is like he wants to normalize with Israel. The only way for him to politically survive, it seems at this point, would be to fold right into Western interests. And this was reporting from the Middle East Eye from last week. Jordan's King Abdullah II warned the U.S. against assassinating, well, it was broken by Axios. Sorry, mild correction. Warned the U.S. against assassinating the president Ahmed al-Shara before the new Syrian leader met with President Donald Trump, a U.S. senator said on Thursday. The remarkable statement by a U.S. senator reveals the deep hostility towards al-Shara in some circles of the Trump administration. It reaffirms Trump's own statements that he has been lobbied directly by foreign leaders to give al-Shara a chance, while his own advisors are skeptical. Quote, this was from Democratic Senator Janine Shaheen, I have been concerned by some rumors that I've heard in some foreign policy circles of the administration that one option that's been suggested is assassinating the new leader of the Syrian government. So Jordan's King says, yeah, she continues. One of the things that was pointed out to us by King Abdullah was that a change in leadership of that kind would create an all out civil war in Syria. That would not be good to take advantage of the opportunity we have to move that country forward. So that was an interesting bit of news that came out yesterday. And of course, it's all qualified like there were rumors.
Hmm. You see, the thing is with Syria, and I think it's like maybe I would play the clip that kind of was revealed with
Yeah,
the
I'm going to in
U.S.
a
ambassador
second.
Syria, because it's I think that's because it's a very good point to kind of build upon. At the end of the day, Al Shara Jolani, like you said, whatever you want to call him, he was in a way, he was trained. He was trained to go from being an Al Qaeda sort of a leader within the Al Qaeda realm, and who's engaged in mass sort of human rights violations and war crimes, to say the very least, into learning how to compromise his beliefs in order to, I guess, not just appease the West, but be able to better control and maneuver his
Yeah.
way within the region. The
I,
region.
I get the sense
Yeah.
he's always been ideologically flexible. I forget whether it was a CNN interview or his 60 Minutes interview where he said he joined Al Qaeda to get involved in politics and to learn
Hmm.
valuable skills or useful
He's
skills.
opportunistic. He's
Yeah,
opportunistic.
yeah.
He knows what he has to do. He's constantly learning through different sort of whether it's through Al Qaeda, whether it's through like the US, how to sort of maneuver in order to get himself to a position of power. But this is the thing with Jolani Al Shada. They can train him, they can mold him, he can play the diplomatic card and wear all the suits that he wants. But the fact of the matter is that the militants that he has been essentially kind of leading up until this point, they are radicalized. They haven't been, I guess, they haven't gone through the whole
It's like
PR,
CIA back.
PRing, schooling, CIA schooling, right?
Yeah.
These people have been radicalized, and this is, and as a result, what's going to happen is this: Jolani is now caught in a situation whereby, if he wants to normalize with Israel, I mean, he's going to try to normalize with Israel because Israel itself has threatened Jolani. At this,
Mhm.
I mean, they have when they were, I mean, they essentially had bombed outside his presidential palace like 2-3 weeks ago, and they
Well,
want to
and
secure their
they
territory that they've controlled. Yeah.
yeah, and 3 weeks ago they bombed the absolute shit out of HTS forces.
Exactly. So they're trying to assert their control over Syria, taking over the valuable resources, water resources, key strategic locations within the south of Syria, and they're using obviously the pretext of we're here to protect the Druze community and obviously make sure that we're protecting Israeli security from the extremists, even though we have a history of HTS working alongside Israel. So there is this antagonistic relationship that's developing between Jolani and Israel, because this is what happened. Like I said, there is international coalitions and alignments that will happen for a particular point in time. So, the imperialist class can gain their particular strategic objectives. But once you have served the purpose, you are disposable. And Jolani is now in a particular position where he's trying to work side to secure Syria. There's a lot of sectarian violence that's breaking out because of these, ISIS, Al Qaeda affiliated sort of militants, which were in HTS, that are essentially attacking the other minority groups. The other minority groups, including the Druze, the Christians, are also going to start retaliating, which is why we're seeing this internalized, essentially what's looking more and more like the potential of a civil war, even according to Marco Rubio today. And so he's trying to manage that, try to appease the West by saying we're going to normalize with Israel, but he can't even control his own forces. And the more he tries to play this, we're gonna play into the liberal Western values card, is going to actually antagonize his own forces, HTS, who's now also been targeted by Israel, who's also combating
Mhm.
all the other minorities, and who are actively not going to be satisfied by with the kind of liberal aesthetic that Jolani is trying to sell. They're going to view it as a betrayal. And I've started to see videos coming out with HTS militants actually defecting from HTS and kind of going against Jolani. So he's going to have that to do.
Right.
Either
I
way, I
mean,
don't see Jolani lasting the year. Like
he
someone's gonna finish Jelani off. This is my official statement, and I stand by it.
all
Either
right.
he's old
Well, I think
or
I think I think time will tell. I definitely have heard that a lot from people in Syria that I've talked to,
Mhm.
and also through third parties. But I just wanted to drill down on one of the alienated aspects of Al Shara to his own people, and just to kind of demonstrate how the United States and Britain, because United States and Britain always work together,
Yeah.
operate when it comes to these kind of regime change operations or grooming someone to serve their interests, their objectives within the region. This came out a couple weeks ago, I think, during a lecture at the Counter on Foreign Relations. The former U.S. ambassador to Syria, Robert Ford, disclosed his involvement in a Western-led initiative to rehabilitate Jolani from an Al-Qaeda leader into a liberal, Western acceptable political leader. I'm going to play this whole thing for the audience's essay because it is very instructive. And so this was former ambassador to Syria talking at the Council of Foreign Relations. It's crazy. I'm going to grab some water while you guys strap in for this really interesting archival footage.
First, this guy, as Roy said, was in Al-Qaeda in Iraq. I was in Iraq between 2000. I started there in 2003 and served until 2010 with 20 months off for good behavior when they made me ambassador to Algeria, but then Condi Rice sent me back to Iraq again. So during that time, this guy, who's now the president of Syria, that's him on the left in his Al-Qaeda guise. And he was a senior Al-Qaeda commander up in northern Iraq in a city called Mosul. For Americans who were in Iraq, you might remember Mosul was one of the worst, nastiest places. The State Department actually lost 5 diplomatic personnel in 2 different car bombs up in Mosul during that time, and hundreds of American soldiers were killed or injured up in that Mosul area by this guy and his fighters. So starting in 2023, a British non-government organization which specializes in conflict resolution invited me to help them bring this guy out of the terrorist world and into regular politics. And at first, I have to tell you, I was very leery of going. I sort of had images of me in an orange jumpsuit with a knife to my throat. But after talking to several people who had gone in, and one of whom had met him, I decided to take the chance. And so the first time I met him, this guy's name is nom de guerre, was Abdulkader Jolani, but his actual name is Ahmed Shara, which he only revealed to the world after he captured Damascus in the Blitzkrieg of December 2024, about 5 months ago. First time I met him, I sat down next to him, and I'm literally as close as I am to Roy, and I said, this is all in Arabic, I said, never in a million years could I imagine that I would be sitting next to you. Long beard, in fatigues. And he looked at me, he speaks very softly, and he said, Wallah ana, me neither. And we went on and actually had a pretty civil conversation. I share this because he said something which really piqued my interest. He never apologized for the terrorist attacks in Iraq or in Syria, although there were many fewer in Syria. Never apologized. But he also said, you know, now I am governing an opposition-held area of northwest Syria, and I am learning that the tactics and the principles that I was following in Iraq do not apply when you actually have to govern 4 million people. And they had 2 million residents of that area of Syria, and then another 2 million refugees who had come there from other parts of Syria. So they had a population of 4 million. He said, I am learning that to govern, you have to make compromises. I was very struck by that. So that was in March 2023, just over 2 years ago. We went back a second time in September. I went to Syria in January.
You're muted.
Sorry, my mic was muted. Yep. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I didn't finish the whole thing. Went back a second time in January because the clip cut. Sorry.
I met Ahmed Shara, the president then. When I saw him in the presidential palace, I said, never in a million years did I expect to see you here. And he kind of grinned and he said, well, I like to keep surprising you, Mr. Ambassador. He has a sense of humor. I don't normally think of Al-Qaeda as having a sense of humor, but anyway.
That was an insane last sentence.
Yeah, it was, but I think it honestly just highlights everything that we've been stating. I mean, the fact that Jolani is, for all intents and purposes, I mean, he was, I guess, in a way, groomed in a way to become this figure that would, that the West could use in order to get, okay, overthrow Assad, and then sort of, okay, this is you look at this, revolutionary who wants to actually forward his country, that he's actually the moderate, the aspect of the moderate. And Jolani obviously kind of understood that this is the way that you're going to actually be able to govern. And that was the best way to come into power. So he was trained. And this is basically what that says, that the UK and the US trained him how to operate, how to speak. In many ways, he's acted, like almost like an agent, not directly like, oh, he's an agent of the CIA, but he has acted as such. And so he's there to obviously serve the interests of the West. And that would mean normalization. It would mean destroying the resistance. That's why he's been cracking down on the Palestinian resistance in Syria. That's why he's been cracking down on Hezbollah. That's why he's been making sure that there aren't any sort of ways by which to see weapons sort of get into Lebanon, in order to allow the resistance in Lebanon to be able to push back against Israel and imperialism there. And yeah, like even now, he's even made not only has he officially declared over and over again he wants to normalize with Israel, has even allowed Israel to occupy, the land of Syria, take over its water supplies, as well as key sort of surveillance locations like Mount Hermon. But now he was like, I think yesterday, when was it? No, was it yesterday? He even kind of, to suck up to Israel, essentially, even, gave 2,500 classified pieces of documents for Eli Cohen, which was like a former Mossad or an Mossad agent, to Israel. I mean, this is classified information. He just handed over as a way, as a goodwill, good faith to, win over Israel and to normalize ties with Israel. It's just the beginning. And this matters. This matters because, like we said multiple times before, Syria was the hub for the resistance, the intelligence hub, the military hub. It was the way in which Hezbollah had been able to strengthen itself to the degree that it could push back against imperialism, that it could push back against Israel. I mean, the whole reason the Palestinian resistance in Gaza, like we said multiple times before, was even able to handle the Israeli occupation forces over the course of how many months now, was because Hezbollah was able to really push back and stretch the Israeli army thin up in the north. And it sacrificed a lot in of itself to do that, but it was only able to do that because Syria, they had Syria that they were able to maneuver to get the kind of weaponry and intelligence intelligence that they needed to be able to operate. And now, Jolani's cracking down on that, and he's making sure to create the perfect sort of conditions to completely eliminate the resistance, so that Operation Gaza 2035 is easier to kind of come replicate. To. This is where Jolani serves. Yeah,
replicate. They want to do it. They want to do it in Syria. They would love to do it in Lebanon after that. Of course, President Aoun or whatever. He was the favored pick for the U.S. State Department to take over leadership in Lebanon for evident reasons. Of course, he's sympathetic to the Western interests and French interests and stuff like that. We don't have time to get into Lebanon, but yes, we wanted to talk about Gaza connected to Project 2025 and have it be a map for what they want for the entire region. And this is nothing new. Like, this is not some ad hoc plan that they're just like coming up with on the fly. Again, I say, like, they take these out of a cabinet that have been sitting around for decades. We've amply demonstrated on this channel how these foreign policy positions and these schemes stay around for a long time. They have a long shelf life, and yeah, nothing's really changed. And we can look at, I guess now that we've kind of established that, they want to replicate all of this throughout the entire region, with the Abraham Accords. Let's talk about the tech sector. Unless you have any more comments on Syria.
just a concluded point on Syria was what I found interesting was what Marco Rubio said today, that he believes that Syria is just weeks away from a civil war from breaking out. Now, that's interesting because, I mean, we've all said this anyway. Anybody who understood the sort of politics and the internal dynamics of Syria was able to understand that with the fall of Assad, essentially this would, and especially the rise of these sort of jihadist extremist groups such as Al Qaeda, ISIS, or all these militants that were associated with it, will bring about a certain threat to the minority groups that would breed the sectarian violence that, yes, would generate potential civil war and the possible some sort of balkanization of the country. But this is what's important. The West does want Jolani to some. I mean, they do want to somehow kind of pacify Syria. They don't want an all-out civil war to break out Syria, because that will become an uncontrollable problem that they won't be able to, that won't allow them to normalize, that will also, the chaos will allow the resistance to continue operating. So that's not what they need. However, the sectarian violence that's there, again, it's like a fine line. We discussed this before we came on as well. I do believe that it's going to become an opportunity to do what, you know, Israel had suggested back in January, and that was to create these sort of semi-autonomous administrative regions within Syria for the different sort of ethno-religious, like, you know, the religious groups in Syria. So that would be, for example, you know, for the Druze community, for the Christians, for the Alawites, for the Shias, etc. And I believe that they're going to try to bring Western forces into Syria to be able to do that in the form of peacekeeping forces. And by doing so, they're going to try to control the situation. Israel's going to keep the territory that it's taken, but in doing so, they're going to try to, again, that's going to be part of the parcel of as well, trying to control and destroy the resistance so that they can again put forward the Gaza 2035 plan and then replicate it in these other territories. So and the fact that Marco Rubio has said that we're looking at potential civil war, I think again is creating the kind of pretext so that they are then able to possibly, I do believe they're going to start looking at the potential of, okay, we might need to put in some, you know, some sort of forces into Syria to kind of help Jolani control the situation and set up those administrative units, while maybe allowing him to somehow maintain power. But I just don't see it working.
Those U.S. bases are still there.
Yeah. I mean, they still are, but like, it's just gonna get, you know, they're gonna get more creative about it. I guess is what they're saying. So like the fact that he made that statement today, I think is very telling. Because on the one hand, like, oh, we're gonna lift all the restrictions and everything's gonna be great, and all the sanctions rather. But then in the same sentence, yeah, well, there's a civil war is about to break out in Syria. So I'm like, it's a very interesting thing to say within the same sort of speech, and that, you know, that Marco Rubio gave today. So yeah, and now we can move into the AI deals, because that's all part and parcel of the same thing. Trump, his Gulf tour,
Yeah.
and
They want the Palestinian problem to go away. They want Syria in a state of controllable chaos, that and they want the UAE and Saudi to become post-oil AI powers. And of course, you know, I'm just going to use this Axios article. If you guys don't read Axios, I really do like their format because it's really digestible, and I'm just going to demonstrate that for like it's made for politicians going to briefings, or made for like political operators, like just to read for like 15 seconds and get an apprehension of the breaking news.
And they always somehow have inside information. It's like, it's always from Axios, I've noticed. Like if there's some sort of inside leak, or, you know, Biden called somebody, you know, Netanyahu an asshole, it would come from Axios. So, you know, it's always good to tap into Axios for these things as well.
Yeah. So this was from 2 days ago as of time of recording. Trump's Gulf gamble. That's the headline. Allison Snyder and Dave Lawler helping UAE and Saudi become AI powers. And of course, Saudi's been wanting to invest in AI for a long time because they are looking for long-term strategies in a post-war, a post-oil world. No one knows when that's really going to happen, but of course, they are trying to cultivate the industrial base for that. So, the enduring legacy of President Trump's trip to the Gulf may be the transformation of the Middle East into a global artificial intelligence powerhouse, despite the massive risks to the U.S. Why this matters? The Biden administration saw the Gulf as a backdoor for China to gain access to computing power needed to advance AI. President Trump and the tech CEOs who joined him in the Middle East see a chance for a multi-billion-dollar deal, or a series of them, driving the news. In deal after deal announced over the week, Trump opened the door for the Gulf to obtain the world's most advanced AI chips. In Saudi Arabia, Trump and tech leaders from AMD, Amazon, other companies announced AI related partnerships worth billions of dollars with a new Saudi state backed AI infrastructure startup called Humane. NVIDIA said it will ship 18,000 of its cutting edge AI chips for a 500 megawatt data center being built by the Saudi startup Humane. What a weird name. Anyways, in the UAE, Trump and the Emirati president Mohammed bin Zayed said the two countries will partner to build the largest AI data center ever outside the US and Abu Dhabi. What they're saying, Trump's AI czar, David Sachs, called the deals a game changer in the global AI race that will help to cement American technology as the global standard before our competitors can catch up. Okay, we're not going to remark on that last quote about catching up. We're just going to keep rolling.
We already know about that one.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll bring that up. So the alternative to this framework was to exclude critical geostrategic, resource-rich friends and allies from our AI ecosystem. This was the Biden policy, and it was foolish in the extreme. But anyways, yeah, between the lines, some policymakers and firms like NVIDIA and Microsoft have argued overly arduous restrictions risk ceding the field to China, undercutting the U.S. AI preeminence rather than bolstering it. Under Biden, those business considerations were often trumped by security concerns. The White House asserts that the U.S. UAE AI agreement ensures the U.S. security interests and dominance in AI while extending the American tech stack to an important strategic partner. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. They want to make Saudi the new AI hub that's going to rival China. Okay, so first of all, I mentioned this before when we were talking. This reminds me of using the IMEC corridor, the Mumbai to Europe trade pipeline that's supposed to compete with the BRI, but is like 2 decades behind. This reminds me of starting a completely new AI sector in the Gulf states to compete with China's AI industry, which is already flourishing. Like they're so far behind. Like, what do they expect to accomplish? It's the same kind of delusional thinking that they're trying to do to fight the BRI with regional frigging trade lane plans.
I mean, so there's two things. So the one thing as well that they're trying to do, I remember like reading Bloomberg as well, is like, oh, it's kind of replacing China, because obviously they had placed all these sanctions on China and sort of trade barriers so that they don't actually have access to American AI chips in order to prevent them from obviously being able to kind of, produce the kind of semiconductors in advance in AI even further that would obviously thwart America's sort of leadership, which isn't really that much of a leadership anymore. So that obviously cost a lot of the tech companies a significant portion of their business, because China was the biggest importer of these chips. So now they're kind of replacing that with the Gulf states, and because the Gulf states want to diversify their economy and create become these AI hubs, that's also one aspect of these deals. However, you're 100% right, and we did say this as well. It's absolutely ridiculous to assume that Saudi Arabia or the UAE, that is incredibly that doesn't have the sort of research development or the kind of infrastructure and also the kind of skill set is going to be able to compete with China, which at the moment, according to like a lot of reports that have been published in the last 2 years, I mean, China is actually leading in the field of AI research and high tech research in at least I think around 80% of the industries, far surpassing that of the United States. This is how advanced China has become. I mean, they're only like a couple of steps away from probably like they've already made significant sort of gains in just the last couple of years since the sanctions on China and the AI chips. So it's kind of ridiculous to even assume, and this is why they actually made it. So part of the deal, so we've got the AI deals with all these companies, but there was also like BlackRock and the new deals that they've established between Saudi Arabia and BlackRock. And the entire purpose of that, if you actually sit down and read it, was actually so that BlackRock can help bring about the sort of not just investment, but to attract the kind of talent, let's say, and the mind into Saudi Arabia, so that they can actually make use of all this technology that's going to be invested into Saudi Arabia, because they don't have anybody. So they're trying to play this game of we're going to could also bring Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states more firmly within the realm of Western influence, because by establishing as well these sort of data centers within Saudi Arabia. And also, I think I was reading earlier today, it's just a little side comment just to say, they've also put forward like this new regulation whereby Saudi Arabia now plans on using this kind of investment, this AI investment and data sort of infrastructure to create these data embassies or something like that, data centers where international governments can place their data in Saudi Arabia. But then what degree of control will the US have over that? I mean, we still don't even know the details, but then that could both go towards it can both be in favor of the US in this area, and they're sort of try to quest on the global domination of data, but it could also backfire because, like a lot of articles have stressed, China could actually use this as a means as a backdoor to get the kind of intel that they need in order to advance themselves. So what they're trying to do is isolate China, prevent China from kind of making those kind of AI advancements that was going to threaten the United States from and their, I guess, private sector from controlling AI, high tech, and therefore data, which kind of solidifies their hegemony over the world. That would bring about a kind of competition that would deter that. Also bring Saudi Arabia firmly within their control, so that then, because obviously then if Saudi Arabia is relying on this kind of tech infrastructures coming from the West, it means, this is obviously incorporating the fact that the kind of data exchanges, this brings it further into the West, which then works towards like the whole normalization and with Israel going forward, and creating this sort of allyship between the West and the Gulf states. But I don't see it working. To be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think normalization's on the table. I mean, a lot of bizarre things happened during Trump's Gulf trip. Okay, you had Qatar, which depends on the United States military for protection, offering him this $400 million plane, basically looks like protection money. We have long had a U.S. foreign policy that, of course, has been controlled by money, including in particular the real estate conglomerates and APAC, the MIC and stuff like that, Democrats and Republicans, and now the Gulf states are in on the game, or in a new way, more crudely and nakedly before them. And I think that the plane signifies it. And look, I am expecting from all of this a defense agreement, a defense cooperation agreement that will come from any normalization with Israel. Okay, so first of all, I just want to say that what was interesting about this whole thing, this AI tech conference, it was separate, but he was also discussing at the same time this Iran deal. And kind of, sorry if I'm kind of like straying around a little bit.
No, it's true.
What was interesting right now is we've kind of entered this new age of where, like, I guess, like morality or what was permissible or not permissible has kind of changed a little bit, because of what we've seen. What was the guy's name? Oh yeah, there is no normalization with Saudi Arabia right now still, and the Trump administration has like now clearly indicated that they're going to proceed on their business arrangements and military arrangements with Saudi Arabia. And the days of Saudi isolation, in the wake of like the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, when some of these very same business leaders absented themselves from appearing in Saudi Arabia, that's over with. So we're kind of seeing a new era. Normalization, I don't think it can work right now. Also, because there are other tensions at play. Like Israel, we've seen throughout their own media landscape, the words of their politicians, they were kind of made very uncomfortable, at least publicly, by Trump saying, yeah, why not take a big plane gift from Qatar? Why not, basically support a Saudi civic nuclear program, delinking it from Israel, Saudi normalization. Why? And then you have other things that he did that are making Gulf states uncomfortable, like proceeding to a new fifth round of Iranian nuclear talks as well. So I'm not sure I see like a whole cohesive strategy beyond what we've talked about. I think there's things that are being tailored towards his own specific like deal making interests within the region. I would be very surprised if the Gulf states and Israel and the United States and Iran are like all on the same page with what's going on. And I definitely do not want to give the
Oh
impression
no.
in this episode that that is what's happening.
Oh no, definitely not. But what I think, I'm of the personal opinion that, yeah, normalization isn't official, and I don't think they're normalizing complete behind the scenes, but they are working. I think the Saudis and the Gulf states are working towards where their best interests lie, and they are testing the waters at the moment. So they've made all these deals with regards to defense, etc., AI, all these tech deals that they're making, and as well with the financial institutions like BlackRock, etc., in order to kind of completely reorganize and rejuvenate the Saudi economy from being an oil-based economy into like a high tech and AI hub, essentially. Uh, and and in but this is the thing. uh, by doing so, the way, the Trump administration is hoping, obviously, to, one, yes, I do think that the Iran nuclear talks are going to play into that, because they're going to try to, and I think it was even the Wall Street Journal. So this is the opportune moment for Iran to be coerced into accepting some sort of agreement, because obviously the resistance in the West Asia, which was kind of a buffer for Iran, is losing power to a certain degree, and losing Syria played into that. Now Saudi Arabia, although they have normalized with Iran, they are sort of entrenching themselves further with the West here, with the kind of deals that they've put in place. And the idea is to try to find, to essentially kind of politically isolate Iran to a point that they feel somewhat threatened, and therefore accept the nuclear deals that Trump has put forward. And he's also using threatening language. Also worth noting here that after every peace, like negotiation, not peace, like every deal, meeting that they've had, the U.S. also ends up sanctioning them every single time with new sanctions, Iran. And then now the ultimate threat is that they're not allowed to have any uranium enrichment at all, which is a red line for Iran. And then, Trump says, well, we're going to be forced to take military action. So there's a lot of posturing and trying to
Yeah,
threaten them, but
but just
they're
like
just
the
trying to,
tariffs, just like the
yeah,
tariffs,
they're just trying to, yeah.
it changes. It changes every day. Like we're gonna have to see what these fifth rounds of talks reveal, because it may be going straight back to, yeah, you're able to have it for civil enrichment up to this quantity, and then in another 2 weeks you're gonna be like, no, you can't have that. So I definitely do expect a lot of back and forth, just like the entire history of these talks.
I've said this to you before. You're, I think, more hopeful than I am.
Mm.
I don't personally think that they're ever going to. I don't think they want a peaceful negotiation with Iran. They don't want Iran to become a powerful force unless Iran completely alters its kind of political standpoint and reposition and aligns itself with the West, which I don't ever see happening. At least not in the short term, anyway. Iran. I mean, even allowing Iran to, enrich itself or enter into normal trade around the world, it will become far more powerful, given that it also works closely with China, Russia, and other BRICS nations, and then entering sort of collaboration with the West. That this would create a kind of country that is going to grow rapidly in terms of the kind of, see, a huge economic prosperity that will bring about the kind of military power and political leverage that I don't think the West wants, unless they become a comprador state, essentially. So I don't see. I think that all what we're seeing right now is kind of theatrics, buying time, and in the future they're going to find a way to try to target Iran in some way or another. But they are trying to use the agreements that they've just reached with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, and obviously the situation in the Levant, to try to coerce Iran through the form of some, the perceived isolation that apparently Iran is in within the, West Asia, to try to accept the conditions that are being thrown their way. And like this back and forth is just, I just think it's a bit of a delay tactic, but it is also chaotic, because the Trump administration is generally rather chaotic. But with regards to Saudi Arabia as well, and the deals that they have, the reason I was going to bring up the normalization, you know, going back to, again, the Gaza 2035 plan. I mean, they're getting what they want. This is part and parcel of the beginning of the Gaza 2035 plan, right? So make these agreements with the U.S., possibly talk about taking over Gaza, as with the idea that a Palestine will be established, but they'll be the control of the Gaza Strip. And then by investing into Gaza to rebuild it, we could very much see that kind of privatization of Gaza and becoming that sort of tech hub that will align with Saudi Arabia's 2030 project for itself, its digital and AI aspirations, and how it fits within the new deals that we've seen. And so I don't think they've ruled out Israeli normalization, but they're just not obviously going to overtly state that now because it's just unacceptable. They're trying to set up the stage by which to do it at the strategic point of time. And if things go well within Gaza, if the objectives are met, that's my opinion.
I don't think anything is going to go well in Gaza, not for the Palestinians and not for Israel and not for the United
Yeah.
States. It's a lose-lose for literally everybody. We're going to end up isolated, reviled, and of course, more Palestinians are going to die. In terms of the Iran deal, I don't want to say that like I think it's going to go through. What I'm hopeful for, what I think is going to happen is it's just going to be like, no, we tried. There's not going to be any military action, but we'll go back to the status quo, which is accepting the unacceptable, containing Iran. Because what else are they going to do? Like, I think if we look at like certain like Western-backed think tanks, like I'm not saying that we're like I'm a fan of. Sorry, this is the wrong window of the Iranian government or anything, but what they are looking at right now, and this is definitely factoring in to part of these negotiations with the Iranian nuclear deal. And this is the last point I make because I'm losing the ability to focus because I've been staring at a screen for an hour and I'm bad with screens. But if we look at something like the Center for Human Rights in Iran, first of all, about us, press kit, frequently asked questions, who we are, what we do. You guys can look at things like this. But Iran's workers battered by brutal repression and lethal work conditions. There's about 44 labor protests going on and strikes across 26 cities in Iran. This was as of this month, over the past month. So basically, they're going to keep doing what they're doing, keep hoping the sanctions continue, keep hoping that workers continue to die during unsafe conditions and destabilize the government, yada, yada, yada. Of course, the sanctions have systematically destroyed the middle class and stuff with inside Iran, but they are also looking at the internal politics and, of course, always hoping for a popular revolution.
I was also going to add with regards to Saudi Arabia, because before we close up, I do think it's important, this whole joint France-Saudi Arabia conference that they're trying to establish, I think some point the 17th of June, because the whole purpose behind that is apparently that they're going to take a very serious approach to publish a document that's going to have a definite timeline by which a Palestinian state will be established. And I guess more like a path by which to do it. We've seen this before. We saw this with the Oslo Accords. Again, but obviously right now we don't know what they're going to produce. So we can obviously, speculate what they're saying. But what was most interesting, what stood out to me, is because we've seen all this before. It doesn't really lead anywhere for the Palestinians. But what Macron had actually said was that, okay, well, the objective behind this is that all countries that haven't recognized Palestine will do so or should do so as a result of this conference, but also the countries that haven't recognized Israel. Now, 150 countries around the world, already over 150 countries around the world, actually recognize Palestine. Hasn't really changed anything for Palestine. But if this means also the recognition of Israel, what does that mean? That the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia will try to recognize Israel through this supposed attempt to publish some sort of document by which to establish two-state solution that isn't actually going to bring about a two-state solution, but the prospects of it, by which that Saudi Arabia can use it as the basis to say, okay, fine, we recognize Israel as an act of goodwill, so that we can then move forward with regards to Palestinian statehood. And then before you know it, that's an indirect de facto form of normalization through the recognition of Israel. I mean, obviously this is speculative, but I found that really interesting because this is what basically the Saudi France French conference is looking towards kind of conducting. And again, it's a Saudi led kind of gathering, and so that's what I find very interesting. But obviously we're going to see what's going to happen in June when this conference takes place. But I also do find it funny that they said that they're going to sanction any country or any actor that acts contrary to. Is that who's going to sanction what? Like the US obviously isn't. What, the EU? You can't even have a consensus when it comes to Israel. So obviously the Eurozone isn't going to sanction anyone because you need the consensus of all states. That's not going to happen. You got Germany once, who is like the biggest supporter of Israel, so that's not going to happen. And then who? The UK. I mean, what's the sterling? Obviously not. So it's a lot of just rhetoric at this point. But at the end of the day, what I'm seeing, if that actually goes through in the way that Macron has presented it, we could be seeing some sort of conditioned recognition for Israel based on this plan of, deadlines to be established, establish Palestinian statehood, which probably will never come into fruition. But then you've got some sort of indirect normalization.
Yeah, it's just kicking the ball forward. So, and in the meantime, they're going to continue this Gideon's Chariot operation in Palestine. And
Yeah.
I wrote on X about the naming, and I'm just going to end on this, just to bring it full circle. Oh, what the fuck? X logged me out. Okay, well, anyways, the naming of Operation Gideon's Chariot, which is now a straight up ethnic cleansing, full blown ethnic cleansing operation. I would like to point out that Gideon didn't have any chariots. Okay. And also chariots have always been a symbol of imperial power. The Assyrians had chariots. Pharaoh had chariots. Caesar had chariots. It's not really the underdog victim thing that the Gideon was fighting in a superior force. And of course, Gideon was also charged with a false worship and idolatry. So misremembered history, actually being the imperial power while believing you're not the imperial power. Sub out chariots for Merkava tanks and do false worship and idolatry. And you have Zionism in microcosm in that entire operational name. So, yeah, that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to continue to monitor the situation, and hopefully it ends sometime soon. Of course, the private military contractors are a pilot program for the inevitable, as they hope it is, privatization of every aspect of the Gaza Strip. So if you guys want, you can go down the Project 2035 rabbit hole. And yeah, I think I'm pretty much wrapped up. I'm still like super jet lagged. So I'm kind of like, I hit a wall like 20 minutes ago and I've just been staring at it.
You've just been listening to go on a rant. You're like, I don't even know what she's saying.
It
Could be
sounds
literally
good.
anything at this point. It just sounds awesome. Just keep going.
Keep it going. All right, y'all. Well, again, we are on Patreon. There will be our regular Patreon content, even though we are doing fewer episodes while I am out of the country. So if you want to check it out there, again, all our stuff's there, including this episode will be there, not paywalled. And yeah, again, Apple Podcasts, guys, 5-star reviews, please. Thanks so much, Alina, for coming on. And I will just end with this. I've been thinking about this for a second, or I am supposed to be on a workcation and trying to enjoy it, but I'm really not able to enjoy much anymore. I suppose I'll go try and find some absolutely radical therapists in the future, because mainstream therapists are the priests of the industrial system who acclimatize people to an inhumane, unjust, and self-destructive social order. War, the nation state, capitalism are sources of nihilism, ennui, and depression. Those feelings and a desire for change are normal. So if you're feeling all shitty, yeah, that's what it is. Speaking solely for straight dudes here, you can either get radical and join a radical organization, or if you're like me, float between them as a liaison, or join the manosphere and only focus on yourself, women's body counts, and how much money you don't make, so you're low value. So anyways, that's just a call to action to get involved in something, because things suck right now and they're only going to get worse. And your depression isn't because there's anything wrong with you. It's called war, the nation state, and capitalism. So we will be back.
I agree.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else you want to add to that? We got like 2 minutes.
No,
left.
I think it was No. I think you finished that off perfectly. I don't need to go off on one of my rants. I think
okay.
I'm all
Yeah.
ranted
No.
out.
All right. Cool. Anyways, guys, thanks so much for listening. This is the semi-weekly, I guess bi-monthly geopolitical roundup. Hope it was helpful, and we will see you Friday if Mark doesn't post his Sandinista interview, which is taking freaking forever for him to edit. So again, blow his ass up about that. All right. See you guys next time here on Colonial Outcasts.